You wouldn't be able to watch this without tonight's invention. But it isn't the television. Modern aeroplanes wouldn't be able to fly without it. But it isn't the jet engine. It's given us mobile phones, compact discs, and space travel. Without it, money would effectively cease to exist. Western society would collapse. And worst of all, I wouldn't be able to start my car. So, on balance then, a tentative thumbs up for the computer. Computers have become so much more than glorified typewriters. They're robots, cars, designers and pilots. Apparently computers now have intelligence. They've become so bright they can even chop vegetables. Computers then have certainly changed the world. Even my willfully low-tech life as a journalist has been completely transformed by computers. You wouldn't believe how backward things were for a reporter way back in the late 20th century. When I was a lad, it wasn't just the hairstyles that were different. To get copy to press, you had to dictate your article to a copy typist who sent it to a sub-editor who checked and edited it with his blue pencil before handing it on to the pictures editor who, after doing picture editing things, passed it on to a layout editor who decided on a page for the article. Next, off it went to the printers. First the page was made up in a flatbed and proofs taken, then a mould was made which was turned via the mysteries of hot metal into a print roller. Finally, the presses rolled. At last. Today, however, things are a bit different. I've just written a newspaper column on this laptop while flying across the Pacific Ocean. And now I'm going to email it via satellite to London for tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. For yesterday's paper. It is, it's yesterday's. That makes your head hurt. Anyway, it's gone. Bye. Today, all those copy typists, editors, printers and so on are replaced by Jerry and his computer. Jerry subs, Jerry lays out and Jerry sends the page to press. Jerry does everything in a fraction of the time. So, thanks to the computer, a man in Penzance can now read something that I wrote the day before, 35,000 feet above New Zealand. And do you know what the most amazing thing about that is? That we take it for granted. Today, computers come in many different forms, but whatever they appear to be doing, all they're actually doing is maths. Very quickly. The story of the quest to build an electronic brain, how computers were conceived, how they grew up and where they're taking us to now is an epic spanning 3 centuries. It's a story of sex and suicide, a tale of obsession and excess. And as with so much of what we now call civilization, it all started with the Victorians. Charles Babbage was the son of a wealthy banker. He was Lucian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge University. He was a Fellow of the Royal Society, a respected economist and amateur playwright, the archetypal polymath, known to everybody who mattered in Victorian London. But it all went wrong. When he died 130 years ago, he was uncelebrated and unloved. No one came to his funeral.
Forasmuch as it hath pleased Almighty God of his great mercy to take unto himself the soul of our dear brother here departed, we therefore commit his body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes
In life, Babbage was a man who mingled with the glitterati of the Victorian intelligentsia. In death, he was abandoned by all but his closest relatives, a far cry from his remarkable and full career.
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
He immersed himself in the study of biblical miracles and spent months calculating that the chances of being raised from the dead were 1 in 10 to the power of 12. Weird. But then this was a man who once baked himself in an oven at 265 degrees Fahrenheit for exactly 4 minutes to find out what would happen. Then, when he'd cooled down, he invented the Greenwich time signal. One afternoon, for fun, he went to the London Borough of Marylebone and counted all the broken window panes. There were 462. And then he drew up a chart detailing the precise cause and type of every single break. Well, how about this one? One day he was lowered into Mount Vesuvius because he wanted to know how hot lava was. Babbage was a complete number junkie. He was obsessed with order, he was obsessed with maths, he was obsessed with tabulation. Every part of his life had to be put in a neat, ordered, structured chart. What Babbage needed was a machine. And the machine he eventually built to fuel his thirst for order was what he called his difference engine. It was what we today might call a computer. It was what his Victorian audience called a miracle.
Is to build another iron ship, even larger.
Babbage publicised his invention at the soirees he held for the great and the good of Victorian London. Everyone from Darwin to Brunel to Charles Dickens and Mary Shelley were guests at Mr. Babbage's dinner table.
Drowning would be the very last thing I'd grab.
These were the Victorian opinion formers, men of science and politics, the people who mattered.
One will simply embark at Southampton at one end, and then walk to America at the other.
And while the diners were dazzled by the wit and erudition to be had, the real reason they were there was for the hard sell.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you please.
Babbage had only built a demonstration piece, a working model of the difference engine. If he was to complete the project, he needed backers.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is a machine that can perform miracles. Observe, if you will. The machine displays number 2. When I crank the handle, lo and behold, number 4.
Bravo.
And another turn.
6.
Indeed, my dear, number 6. And what would happen?
At the time,
if I
the
turned
idea
handle
that a
once
machine
more?
could be instructed was a radical concept. It seemed to Babbage's Victorian audience that what they were watching was a machine almost capable of thought.
Another turn.
Babbage was so far ahead of his time.
One more turn.
It's hardly surprising that his guests found it hard to keep up.
129?
You've broken it, Babbage.
Not broken, sir. Engineered. Before you came, I set the machine to jump to 129 when it reached 12. I made it happen.
Though his guests couldn't possibly have understood how the device worked, what they did realise was its potential. In the mid-1800s, the British Empire ran not on tea, but on tables. There were mathematical tables for everything, calculating insurance premiums, pension entitlement, and most importantly, navigation. Trouble was, there were errors, lots of them. And things could go badly wrong. Ships bound for Manila ended up in Hong Kong. The empire was running aground on the slip of a computer's pencil.
Well, there are engineering applications, we all know that, but what of the rest of mankind?
Mr. Babbage's marvellous machine offered an end to human error. The difference engine would calculate and print out the vital tables, eliminating mistakes all the way through the process.
And the computer will be released from his life of drudgery.
Brilliant, Babbage. Quite brilliant.
For once, we can actually say the British government knew a winner when they saw one. Even though Babbage only showed them this, a small part of the machine, the Exchequer responded by giving him a cheque for £17,000. And that's what it would have cost back then to buy 2 warships. So here we have Babbage. He's at the height of his powers. He's rich, he's connected, he's popular, and he has the funding to change the world. And he made a complete Horlicks of it. First, he fell out with the one man in the country capable of making the machine, his engineer, Joseph Clement. Babbage claimed he was being ripped off. Clement walked out. Next, he changed his mind about the design and started from scratch on an even bigger, better machine, the imaginatively named Difference Engine 2. Finally, Babbage ran out of money, and the project ground to a halt. The Difference Engine was never made. The money stopped, and then the ridicule started. Even the Prime Minister, Robert Peel, had a dig, saying that if the engine were ever to be built, it should be set to calculate its own usefulness. Oh, how they laughed. Babbage's groundbreaking machine was dismissed by a weary wave of the Chancellor's hand. In the end, it was even claimed that the ridiculous crate of cogs would never have come to anything anyway. But in 1991, to mark the bicentenary of Babbage's birth, engineers at the Science Museum did build the cogwheel brain. And it did work. This is a beautiful piece of engineering. Now what you do is you set the equation or the piece of maths that you want to do on these cogs here. Then you turn this handle and the answer comes spewing out on this piece of paper here. And that's it. Human error eliminated. All the men with pencils eaten and spat out by this brass and gunmetal. The machine's accuracy was down to what Babbage called the unerring certainty of mechanism. The idea was that the position of the cog, unlike a thought, cannot be misinterpreted. Don't think, however, that the Difference Engine was just some kind of fancy pocket calculator. I mean, you couldn't turn that upside down and snigger at the word boobs, for example. And don't think either that it would be stumped if you tried to give it something more difficult than 34 to the power of 7. This thing can do ferocious calculations. Stuff like this. Now, these are ballistic equations, and that's important because when the Americans got their first computer in the 1940s, the first thing they did with it, the first thing, was work out how far a projectile would go out of a gun and where it was going to land. They made gunnery tables. So, if Babbage had made this in 1850, the First World War would have lasted 25 minutes? No, really, think about it. Gun, trench, weight of projectile is known to you, turn the handle a few times, bye-bye Fritz. Babbage recognized the need for even more powerful machines and continued designing mechanical computers. He came up with what he called the analytical engine, which worked in almost exactly the same way as a modern electronic computer. But by this stage, Babbage had run out of people who took him seriously, and so the device, like his difference engines, remained on paper. Charles Babbage gave the world many things. Gave the theatre coloured lighting for a kick-off. And he left the railways with 2 different types of cowcatcher. But alas, he produced no brass brains. So the chance of a Victorian information age was extinguished. So what if the difference engine had been made in the 19th century? Well, the empire would have been even more efficient, and that would have made Britain even richer. And that would have meant the First World War probably wouldn't have started in the first place. And the Titanic wouldn't have been so fatally flawed, and the Hindenburg wouldn't have crashed. The list is quite simply endless.
Unfortunately, however, Babbage's genius went with him to his grave. And it wasn't until the middle of the next century, 80 years later, when the men with pencils were really up against it, that the need for a mechanical computer surfaced once again.
This time, it was Adolf Hitler who ensured that a computer was needed like never before.
I'm sure we all know the story by now. It's 1940, Europe's under the Nazi jackboot, stout-hearted East End folk, Britain in big trouble.
The one thing that might prevent a German victory was spying.
We shall fight on.
Staying one step ahead of Hitler by listening in to wireless communications between his commanders at head office and the troops in the field.
Obviously, all these messages were scrambled. But it was no good looking at a piece of paper with gibberish on it and saying, well, that's impossible. If we were going to win this thing, we had to crack the codes. It was that simple.
The time had come for a maths machine. A machine that could make sense of all the coded nonsense. Two men rekindled Charles Babbage's dream, and one of them was a talented marathon runner called Alan Turing. Turing was a brilliant young mathematician, doing his bit for the war effort. Of course, he was not alone. When war broke out, the government rounded up the best academics available and put them to work on knotty problems of national importance. Turing found himself reunited with many of his friends and tutors from Cambridge, all set to work as military code breakers. Their first success was cracking the German Enigma code. That meant the U-boats were defeated and that vital Allied shipping was safe once more. The story has been told and retold. There have even been films made and plays written about Enigma. But Enigma was only part of what happened here at Station X, Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire. During the war, this place was intelligence central. Spies, strategists and soldiers rubbed shoulders with the finest maths brains in the country.
And one of the biggest brains, perhaps the biggest on the whole site, was to be found in here, Hut 8. This is where Alan Turing worked.
Turing, like Babbage, was an obsessive. It was Turing who was responsible for cracking the Enigma code. But the big problem for the Allies was something called the Lorenz cipher. Lorenz was the Holy Grail, the almost impenetrable code used by the German High Command and Hitler himself. Now, a code is simply a mathematical problem, and in the 1930s, Turing had proved that something called a universal machine could solve any mathematical problem on the planet. The idea had set the maths world alight. But it was just theory, until now. The theoretical universal machine was about to become Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic computer. It was to be the key that would unlock the Lorenz cipher.
In many ways, having the idea is easy. I have lots of ideas. I had one this morning, in fact, for a car which flies and then somehow goes underwater at 4 times the speed of sound. The tricky bit is building it, and it wasn't Turing or any of the Oxbridge graduates here at Bletchley that built Colossus. It was a post office engineer called Tommy Flowers.
Before the war dried up funds, Flowers had been working on automatic telephone exchangers. And when the concept for the Colossus project arrived on his desk, he immediately realized that he was looking at something strangely familiar. Just like a telephone exchange, what was needed was a massive collection of switches. Tommy was uniquely placed to offer a groundbreaking solution to the Lorenz problem.
Wait here, please.
He'd been working with Professor Max Newman, Turing's old tutor at Cambridge, and between them, Flowers and Newman had given Turing's universal machine the chance of life.
Hello, Flowers. Good journey. Excellent. Thank you, Newman. Let me take your coat.
All that was needed was the green light from military intelligence. It was just a matter of having the meeting and applying the rubber stamp.
Gentlemen, Mr. Flowers and I have been thinking about ways to speed up the Lorenz cracking. Mr. Flowers thinks he's got an answer.
Well?
Oh, yes, right. Well, the problem is that the two data streams need to be synchronized, which means running two teleprinter tapes in perfect time together. That's the real problem, you see. The tapes keep on getting out of step with each other. What the new machine will have is the capability of memorizing one particular stream, therefore making the need for synchronized paper tapes a thing of the past. And this will make everything much quicker.
Much quicker?
Oh, yes, much.
And how does it work, this machine of yours?
Well, I haven't actually built it yet.
Really?
The people at Bletchley were dismissive. But Tommy brought new technology to the party. Tommy brought the valve.
Valves?
Yes, valves.
Oh dear, said the top brass. That won't work. Valves are nowhere near reliable enough for this sort of thing.
Can you imagine how often we'd have to keep replacing parts in some machine containing 2,000 of the damn things?
Well, if you don't mind me saying so, valves work perfectly well so long as you don't turn them off.
How long would this new machine take to build exactly? I mean, well, how long before we can expect it to be up and running?
It's difficult to say. I would say about a year, maybe sooner.
Well, there we are then. There really isn't any point in taking this any further.
With all due respect.
No, Newman. The war will probably be over in a year, and we'll have spent a fortune on an electrical Christmas tree in June.
Go back to sorting letters. Silly man from the post office.
But Tommy built his machine anyway. He and his team at the GPO's research facility at Dollis Hill worked around the clock. Flowers was so convinced by the worth of the project that he ended up spending almost £1,000 of his own money to ensure that the machine was completed as quickly as possible. In the end, it took just 10 months to design and build Colossus. And as Tommy predicted, it did work. Its 1,800 valves glowing reliably. Where previously it had taken months to decipher a German message, by which time it was out of date, Colossus could crack the toughest, highest-level German cipher in hours, and sometimes minutes. The top brass was so impressed, they immediately ordered 10. This was Genesis, the universal machine that Turing had dreamed about. It was the first modern computer, and like all modern computers, it was a maths machine. It used mathematics to break the Lorenz cipher. With the Lorenz cipher cracked, Hitler's email was Allied property. The result was victory in the information war, and that heralded the end of the war itself. Shortly before D-Day, a Colossus decryption revealed that 2 panzer divisions were lying in wait on an intended landing site. Because of the information, the plan was changed and thousands of lives were saved. It's estimated that the duration of World War II was shortened by at least a year because of the work done at Bletchley Park, and Tommy's computer, Colossus, was at the very heart of that work. After the war, most of the Colossi were dismantled and their parts returned to GPO stores. But at least 2 of them went with the permanent spying community to their new home in Cheltenham. Their life after that is shrouded in mystery. It's been rumoured that they were used to crack Soviet ciphers during the Cold War. It's also been said that one Colossus still exists deep in the bowels of GCHQ, though it's also said they and their plans were destroyed in the 1960s. But whatever became of the Colossus machines, one thing is certainly true. Subject to a 50-year rule and bound by the Official Secrets Act, officially, they didn't exist at all. In many ways, this story is a tragic one. Alan Turing was convicted of homosexuality. He was stripped of his security clearance and ostracized by the intelligence community. He committed suicide in 1954, a tragic end for a brilliant man. Today, Turing is generally considered to be the father of the modern computer, and there are 7 academic institutions and even a ring road named after him. There have been many films, plays, and plenty of TV documentaries made about him. Turing, mathematical alchemist.
But for me, the real hero of the piece is Tommy Flowers. By turning Turing's dream into a reality, by building the world's first electronic programmable computer, he was the one who shortened the war. He was the one who saved those thousands of lives. And yet, had you ever heard of him? I hadn't. Mick Jagger's never financed a film about his life. There's no plaque. And the ring road round the town where he was born is called the M25.
Tommy Flowers went back to his telephone exchanges. He desperately tried to get the GPO to fund further research into computing, but couldn't persuade his bosses to share his vision. After all, they didn't know what Tommy had already achieved, and of course, he wasn't allowed to tell them. Like Turing and the rest, Tommy kept his mouth shut about Colossus. Flowers was awarded £1,000 by a grateful nation in recognition of his war work. No one knew it barely covered the personal debt he'd run up on the first Colossus.
After the war, Britain was in a prime position to exploit the technology. But because Colossus never existed, don't know what you're talking about, we were completely written out of the history of computing. And then the whole industry was developed by our rather less secretive, air-conditioned, centrally heated friends, the Americans.
At the time, no one, not even the Americans who were romping away, realized the potential of what they were developing. Like Colossus, early attempts weren't what we would recognize as computers today. They didn't sit on your desk or play games, they did maths for the US military. The idea that computers would become an everyday machine used by non-mathematicians or civilians was not seriously entertained. Even IBM's Supremo, Thomas Watson, confidently predicted the world will probably eventually need 5 computers. One reason that home computing was such a big no-no was the sheer size of the machines, which was all to do with the switches. First, there were mechanical switches, then there were valves, which gave way to transistors, which in turn, in 1958, gave birth to Switch Nirvana, the silicon chip.
Today, Tommy Flowers could have got his 2,000 switches, the entire Colossus machine, on this silicon chip. In fact, he could have got rather more than Colossus on it, because this chip, the brain from a modern PC, and I'm talking now only about the silver strip in the middle there, has 100 million switches. That's 50,000 Colossuses.
But even though the microchip meant that computers could be small enough to take home, no one did. Because in reality, size didn't matter. If the computer was really going to change the world, it was going to have to get a lot easier to use. Enter at this point a group of groovy Californians who saw the future. In the early 70s, the Xerox Corporation founded the Palo Alto Research Center just outside San Francisco. The coolest, hippest scientists on the planet were assembled to come up with something amazing, the paperless office. And what they did come up with, and remember this was 30 years ago, was staggering.
Good morning.
Good morning.
A screen with icons accessed by mice.
Well, looks interesting. Let's take a look at this.
Floppy disks. Well, it was 30 years ago.
I'm going to need a couple of copies of this.
A laser printer.
Oh, thank you.
Laptops. Email.
What's the mail this morning?
And of course, the web.
Push another button and the information is sent electronically to similar units around the corner or around the world.
Anything else?
But no one was interested. Electric post? Absurd. When I started work on a local newspaper in 1978, computers still only did things for the government. And the typing pool was still using typewriters all the way past Bucks Fizz, Duran Duran and Bananarama. It wasn't until the mid-80s, only 20 years ago, that very slowly the realization began to dawn that computers were going to be more than machines that did serious maths for engineers and soldiers.
But in my experience, it's only been in the last 10 years that computers have spread their own brand of chaos and mental breakdown around the world. And for such a recent innovation, we really do seem to have fallen deeply and passionately in love.
Today, computers are quite simply everywhere. They're on your desk, on your lap, in your palm. They work your washing machine, they play your CDs, they're in your wristwatch. In short, just about anything that uses electricity today will have a microprocessor, a computer. The average British home contains about 100. So instead of there being 5 computers in the world, there are over 17 million in the UK alone. And we've reached the point where there are plenty of things we simply couldn't do without computers. And you see, that's the problem. Computers may be great at doing maths quickly. They may even appear to be clever. But they're not, you know. They're as daft as brushes.
And the reason why they're so stupid is that they blindly carry out human mistakes perfectly and uncritically. Now, this stupidity should scare us to death, but it doesn't. What scares us is this.
I'm a B2.
For years, we've been told that one day we'll build a computerized, emotionless cyborg that absolutely will not stop. But is this really the future? Can we ever expect to be walking with robots?
At the moment, this is as scary as it gets. It's the Roomba-Vac, a robot vacuum cleaner, which they say is intelligent. But it's not that intelligent, is it? Because it can't even recognise when it's stopped being on a rug. Watch. Look at that. Come on, moron. Even its makers say in the handbook, which I've got here, that it may get stuck from time to time, and you don't see that in the science fiction films. Arnold Schwarzenegger's plans for world domination beaten by a cunningly placed pot plant. Get out of there and stay fashionable.
For anything approaching the kind of world domination that Governor Schwarzenegger deals in, computers that run robots would require at least a modicum of intelligence. And this is what scares us. Very credible scientists out there are pushing AI as the next big thing. Even Alan Turing predicted that one day computers would have minds of their own.
To find out whether a computer was intelligent or not, Turing devised a test. It was very simple. He said that if you can have a conversation with it and believe it to be human, then it must have some kind of intelligence.
He even scripted an example of the kind of intelligent chats that might occur.
In the first line of your sonnet, which reads, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" would not a spring day do as well or better?
It wouldn't scan.
How about a winter's day? That would scan all right.
Yes, but nobody wants to be compared to a winter's day.
Would you say that Mr. Pickwick reminded you of Christmas?
In a way.
Yet Christmas is a winter's day, and I don't think that Mr. Pickwick would mind the comparison.
I don't think you're serious. By a winter's day, one means a typical winter's day, rather than a special one like Christmas.
In 1950, Turing predicted that within 100 years, we'd be able to have a conversation like that on any subject with a machine. However, there are those who say we can do it now, 50 years early. This is what they're talking about. This is Ella. Don't be fooled by the picture. She's a machine, and I'm supposed to be able to have a conversation with her. So let's give it a try. What's she saying here? Hello, my name's Ella. Nice to meet you. Please tell me what name I should call you. Jeremy, say. Does being a man pay well? Do you like cheese? I'm not so excited about cheese. A little is okay. I saw the Doobie Brothers there. How did it look to you? It look, they look. You've never heard of the Doobie Brothers, have you? What's heard of the Doobie Brothers like? You don't even know where to put apostrophes. She's intelligent in the same way that I think my dog's intelligent. Who, what, where, why, when, how? You should be a newspaper reporter. Again, let me change the subject a little. She doesn't know, does she?
One of the AI community's leading lights is Professor Kevin Warwick.
Well, this is a robot head.
Dissatisfied with vacuum cleaners and robot dogs, Kevin's gone one stage further. His cyborg comes complete with
radar in its nose and an infrared top lip.
Is it intelligent?
Well, in a very limited way, I guess it is. It's sort of a basic instinct. What do I do with this information that I'm getting? How do I move? How do I operate if this signal is different?
So what's it doing now?
Well, if you clap your hands...
Oi, over here. Oh, it did it.
It's making basic decisions. All we've got it doing here is programmed to make basic decisions based on that sensory information that's coming in.
Getting the information in is nothing. That's like picking up a book. That's not an intelligent thing to do. Reading the book and knowing what the words mean, that's surely the intelligence.
Many machines can read books nowadays, but it means something different electronically to the machine as it would mean to a human.
Though the cyborg head does a reasonable job of sensing, it can't really interact with or explore its surroundings. It's fastened to its robot arm. And according to Kevin, it's only as intelligent as a dishwasher.
If that's a dishwasher...
Yes.
Where are these in terms of... Are they dolphins, chimps?
I think you'd have to say it's about the 50 to 100 brain cell area. So realistically, you're talking slugs and snails.
But a slug and a snail, they know to eat. They know. These things don't...
They have some innate abilities.
There's no self-preservation with that.
Well, we do have. The power supply, they don't have their own batteries. They each have power they're picking up from the floor here. That's where they're getting their energy. That's where they're getting their food
But
from.
if you turned off this section of the floor...
If we turn off this
and one
section,
was here,
they have a basic instinct to go and look for some power somewhere else.
They will
that. Keep going to do that until they find some.
So if I put him down...
It should go off looking...
So he'll have to go and look for power. And I got to tell him to do that?
No, it's an innate response for that robot. It's a basic thing of its life. Yeah.
No, his lights have come back on.
Lights have come on.
So he's found power.
It's happy now that it's getting power. Away to go.
What would happen if all the old, stupid computers we have now suddenly stopped working? Realistically, you'd need a lot of explosives to rid the world of all computers. But for microprocessors, there's something even more devastating than TNT. EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. They say that if an EMP device was exploded here, 300 miles above us, anything containing a silicon chip would stop working. Europe would, in effect, be switched off.
Hello? Oh, not the coffee machine. Oh, please, no. So, the EMP scenario. It's the latest Hollywood gimmick, really. Been used by everyone from Bond baddies to Matrix good guys via George Clooney and Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11. Thing is, though, would it actually work?
Somewhere in England, there's a secret facility where the EMP death ray can be summoned up at the flick of a switch. An EMP strike would occur instantaneously, but what you're about to witness is EMP in slow motion. Inside the chamber, we can see what happens through specially hardened CCTV units. Our cameras wouldn't stand a chance. With the hapless PC entombed, the electromagnetic charge is racked up.
I'll just carry on increasing the stress.
And here's the scary bit. You can switch the computer back on, but there's no point. It's gone mad.
Looks like we've lost BIOS, yeah. We've got a message saying invalid electronic serial number. That effectively the computer's lost its identity. We get an error message saying that it cannot find the hard disk. This is symptomatic of something that an EMP event could cause, and that's a catastrophic failure.
EMP would mean the end of the Western world. It would mean no computers. This in turn would mean no electricity, no telephones, no cars. Supermarket shelves would empty, never to be replenished. Aeroplanes would fall from the sky. To say that the computer has become a double-edged sword seems somehow inadequate. We worry about whether or not it's going to take over, and yet without our silicon servant, if microprocessors were removed, we'd almost certainly descend into anarchy within the week.
There's no doubt that the computer has changed our world out of all recognition in an incredibly short period of time. And it seems the really major developments are still to come. Pretty soon, they say, the useless idiot that sits on your desk crashing every 5 minutes will become truly benevolent, pandering to your every whim and fantasy. Well, that's what they say. But these are the people, remember, who promised that I'd be wearing a Baco-foil suit by the year 2000 and living on a diet of pills. They said the moon would be colonised in my lifetime and that my dog would need a space helmet. So you'll forgive me if I remain a little bit sceptical about the claims being made for the future of the computer. Apart from anything else, I'm not sure that I want voice recognition or a laptop that says, "Hello, Jeremy," in an American accent every morning. And I definitely don't want anything PC inserting in me. Good night.
Let's go for a walk.
Deal.
Mob rule in ancient Rome next. The rise and fall of an empire continues with Tiberius Gracchus, followed by a black chapter in Scotland's history, the Glencoe Massacre at 3, here on Yesterday.